In Shakespeare's play, Hamlet, death and what lies beyond death's door is spoken of as the undiscovered country or undiscovered land. There's something like that mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. In the great roll call of faith, where we find one name after another of people who have sought God and been faithful to God as God has been faithful to them, we discover some words that indicate the very thing that I want to focus on this morning. In chapter 11, verse 13 through 16, the Bible reads as follows. It's talking about Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Moses and many others. He said, "These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles upon the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking about a land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared for them a city." Many years ago, someone penned these words. It was about a non-Christian comforting a Christian friend who was dying. The non-Christian said, "My poor friend, how sorry I am that you are leaving the land of the living." But the dying man, utterly radiant, replied, "You are wrong. I am leaving the land of the dying and going to the country of the living." I want to guide your thinking just for a few moments about what the Bible has said and teaches us about heaven. I also want to raise a few of the misconceptions that so often dog the path of so many when it comes to the idea of heaven. The Bible, however, is very clear in many respects. I want to begin asking a question. What are some of the most common misconceptions about heaven? What are some of those misunderstandings that so many people may possess? The first misconception I want to share with you is the one that where a Christian goes today, if a believer passes away today and dies, where do they go? We often use the word heaven. And that is correct, but what you need to understand is that the heaven that we talk about currently is not the eternal dwelling place of God's people for all eternity. We kind of lose sight of that. We have what the Bible talks about. Jesus referred to it as paradise. He told the thief on the cross, "I say unto you, today you will be with me in paradise." But we also find the Scripture telling us about more than paradise. It tells us in both Isaiah as well as Revelation that God is preparing a new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness will dwell. We find this very clearly delineated in Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 through 3, that God is preparing a place for His people. And the current place will one day give way to the place that God has prepared, a new heavens and a new earth. That's the first misconception that we may have. The same thing applies to those that I will talk about next week, those who will be eternally separated from God. We think of hell. But we'll find also in the book of Revelation that death and hell itself is cast into the great lake of fire. So we'll see that more next time. That there are intermediate places currently, but there's going to come a permanent, forever place that's yet to come. A second misconception is that the best thing that we can hope for is to be freed from the physical reality of the world in which we live in. You can even hear this at funerals, where the focus is primarily on now the soul is free. And we seem to talk in terms that the Bible doesn't. We seem to long for that which the Bible doesn't encourage us to long for. Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, he uses a Hebrew way of speaking. He talks about he is not wishing to be unclothed. And we might think he's talking about his garments that he's wearing. No, he's not. He's talking about his body. He even uses the figure of speech. This tent in which I am living one day will be replaced with a building that has been built not by human hands but by God Himself. Those are ways that he's speaking about what God is going to do. To speak about the so-called immortality of the soul as if the resurrection has no major part in God's plan is to talk more like the ancient Greeks than it is talk about what the Bible itself says. To be human is what God has created us to be. And we forever will be human. We'll never be angels. We'll never have wings. But we will have a resurrected body that will be capable of living forever without any kind of impairment or disease. No effects of aging, no effects of accidents or disease at all. Forever living that condition in a body that Paul talks about being glorified like the Lord Jesus' body. We will be physical. To be an individual without a body, just to be a soul floating around somewhere, is not biblical at all. God will raise us to be physical beings because that is how He's created us to be. And by the way, if I can jump ahead just a little bit, when the Bible talks about the new heavens and the new earth, it is not talking about some sort of ethereal thing out there floating around, kind of, you can't really see, kind of hazy. No, it is talking about heaven is spoken of in very concrete realities. It talks about a city and even the dimensions of the city being given. It talks about a stream. It talks about a garden. It talks about streets of gold and pearly gates. You see, it speaks in very physical terms because that's what heaven is going to be. That's what the new earth is going to be. It will be physical. A third misconception that often is perpetuated is that heaven will be, well, to use the word, it will be boring. I mean, what are you going to do? We have an idea that somehow we equate heaven to be something more on the lines of an endless worship service or church service. It is going to be a place filled with activity. Jesus, in parable after parable, talks about and gives us glimpses of this, that there will be assignments given. There will be responsibilities that we are to live, to uphold. There will be things that we will do. And yes, there will be praise. Yes, there will be worship. And yes, it will be something far beyond our comprehension as how beautiful and glorious it will be. But it will not be, listen to me, it cannot be, it could never be boring to be in the presence of the most magnificent being ever, God Himself. So the idea of heaven being boring and someplace we really would rather not consider going is simply a misconception. Misconception number 4. That somehow in heaven we will be somewhat kind of absorbed. We'll lose our identities. We will kind of just be part of this great conglomeration of spirits. That's not true. That's more Hindu than Christian. We will maintain our individual identities. In other words, you will be who you are, but far better. But far better. We will be who we will recognize each other. I've talked on different occasions about how that will be. You will know as you are known. You will recognize people. You will be reunited with people. You will meet people and you will know them in ways that you cannot know them upon the earth. It's amazing what has been prepared. Job himself says this in Job chapter 19, verses 26 and 27. And by the way, many scholars believe that Job is probably the oldest of the Old Testament books, meaning it was written far before any of the others. He says this, "And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another." So even in the oldest book of the Bible, there is the hope there of the resurrection. We will be resurrected. Jesus in John chapter 14, speaking to his disciples on the night prior to his crucifixion, he spends time talking to them, preparing them, helping them to face something they had no comprehension was coming. And in the context there, he begins telling his disciples that he is going away to prepare a place for them. He's going away and he will come again and receive them to himself. That where he is, there they may be also. The thing of it is that I want you just to note from that passage this morning is he talks about, I am going to prepare a place, not a space, not a place for disembodied spirits to float around on clouds, but he speaks of a place that he is preparing for those who trust in him. So those are some of the misconceptions. Let me ask a second question and then answer it. Why are Christians today, especially in our nation, not excited about heaven? What is it about us today that is simply, well, heaven is not something we think much about unless it's a funeral. Then we may think something about it. Or a bad diagnosis from a doctor, we may begin pondering it. There are many reasons, I'm sure. I just want to highlight two. One is Satan has done a very excellent job in distracting Christians from the glories of heaven. He's got us thinking about a lot of things. He's got us focused on a lot of things. We think about entertainment. We think about possessions. We think about retirement. We think I can go on and on and on. We think about so many things. Not that those things are bad with and in themselves. I'm not suggesting that. But he gets us distracted. He gets us focused on the comforts of the here and the now, which leads me to my second reason, is that we have it really nice in the United States of America. Regardless of what you hear on television newscasts and talking heads, you know as well as I that compared to the peoples of the world, we live in a gloriously comfortable nation. We're not going hungry. We're not living with the basic necessities unmet in life. Whatever the socioeconomic level we're talking about, we are okay compared to so many in the world. Because of that comfort, and because of a satanic strategy that's very effective and working very well, we don't think much about what's coming. But it has not always been the case. If I would ask you to do this, if I take the time to do this and ask you to grab the hymnal there in front of you, I'm not going to do that, but you can do this on your own. You can begin flipping through hymn after hymn after hymn, especially noting those that are a bit older. And you will find that the last verse or the last stanza is the heaven stanza. Why? Why? Because life can be hard. Life can be difficult. It can be challenging. 330 in that hymnal is Amazing Grace. Now, no one knows for sure, I don't think, how many verses it truly has, because it has so many. But the last one is an anonymous verse. Apparently, John Newton didn't write it, or he wrote it later. We don't know. When we have been there 10,000 years, bright shining like the sun, we have no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Very appropriate to be there. If I would have time to take you to 410, it is well with my soul. A beautiful hymn. You heard it a while ago, done beautifully. Horatio Spafford, a Chicago businessman, lost his holdings, the majority of what he owned, in the Chicago fire. On the advice of his physician, his wife, her health was failing, and they needed to get away. So he put his wife and 4 daughters on a ship bound for England. Last minute business kept him delayed. He sent his wife and his girls on. You probably know the story. Somewhere in that journey, the ship that the Spaffords were on, the Spafford girls were on, collided with another ship, and in the confusion and the pandemonium that ensued thereafter, all 4 Spafford daughters drowned in the ocean. Spafford received simply a telegram that read, from his wife, it read simply, "Saved alone." He wrote that hymn, standing, looking into that black water where his daughters perished, and he wrote, "It is well with my soul." And that last stanza speaks about one day when faith will be sight. Life's hard. When I was in high school, our music teacher was also a preacher, which is kind of a unique combination. But he had us singing songs that I don't know if it is allowed in schools anymore. I really don't. He loved Negro spirituals. Folks, you ought to read those sometimes. You don't have to sing them, just read them. What was it like being a slave, being property, and being forced to work? What was it like living those conditions? Not that I know and not that I can tell you, but think about the song, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariots, coming forward to take me where? Home." What were they looking forward to? In the pain of their existence upon this life, they were looking for just what Abraham was looking for. Looking for that city who has foundations, whose maker, whose builder, whose architect is none other than God himself. Why do we not think about it much? Because even though our lives may have difficult stretches in them, we have it pretty well. Many times, pretty well. Thirdly, why should Christians learn of heaven? Because, folks, that's where we're going. That's where we're going. Another old hymn, "I'm just a pilgrim, just a passing through." Like it or not, that's true. We are passing through. I heard a statement a number of years ago. The first time I ever heard it, it kind of made me curious, and I thought, well, yeah, that's probably true. The statement was, "He is so heavenly minded that he's no earthly good." I thought, yeah, that sounds true. If somebody is their head is always in the stars, their head is always elsewhere, maybe they wouldn't be much earthly good. But then I began noticing that those believers of past generations who were the most good upon this earth were those who were most heavenly minded. Those that made the biggest impact and done the greatest for humanity are those who are not simply locked in here and now, but they're looking for the hereafter. A couple examples. Think about John Wesley, George Wakefield, the great revivalists, John Newton, for that matter. John Newton, under his preaching, there was a young man, of all things, a politician, that was saved. His name was William Wilberforce. He was in the Parliament in England. The English were still very heavily involved in the slave trade. And almost at first, at least single-handedly, Wilberforce determined that he was, in his life, going to end the institution of slavery in the United Kingdom. He worked all of his life. And just days before his death, Parliament passed the resolution, the law, that no longer would any of the territories under British rule practice slavery. Why did he do that? Because he was simply a great humanitarian? Yeah, he was a humanitarian, no question about that. But he was much more. His mind was on what's to come. Why? Well, first, because of the brevity of life. The brevity of life. We need to learn about heaven. Job, if I can appeal to him, he says, man is born of woman is just a few days. And he also points out, remember, O God, that my life is but a breath. The psalmist in Psalm 102, verse 3 writes, my days vanish like smoke. If you're younger, you're sitting here, you think you have such a long period of time in front of you. If you're older, you will affirm the fact that the years have went by fast. That's true. Even if you make it well over 100, life is short upon this earth. It's brief. Secondly, because how we live now matters. What you do now in time will affect eternity. The two are not unrelated. So many people today are so fascinated and focused on clothes, cars, houses, money, computers, video games, careers, and none of those things are bad, by the way, unless they become your primary focus. But those things, none of those things have eternal value. They have no eternal value. In light of eternity, they are worth nothing. Everything we see will pass. It's only what we treasure in God's kingdom that will last. Thinking about heaven will help you now. It helps you keep things in focus. You're not overwhelmed depending on if your guy's in office or not. When the tax bill comes, you won't be so frustrated that so much goes away from you. And on it may go. The troubles that you and I face will begin to seem so, less in light of eternity. In one of C.S. Lewis's books, The Chronicles of Narnia, at the very end, the battle's over. The victory's been won. And Aslan the lion is beckoning the mouse to come. And you have to know he personifies these animals, so they're not just animals, they're also beings, as it were. And they go to that undiscovered land. It was time. It was time to go there. One of these days, the time for all of us will come. And we will face that door that leads to that undiscovered country, the glories of which human language cannot even begin to capture. But the question always is, are you ready for that? Have you made sure you've got your reservation in? You see, it's not a piece of paper. It's not a number you're going to call on the phone to make the reservation. The reservation is a person. His name is Jesus. It's what Jesus says in John chapter 14, verse 6. He says quite clearly there, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. He is the way. And I ask you today, have you trusted Him? Because folks, there is no other way. There's no other options. It doesn't matter what our world tells us. It doesn't tell us that, I don't care if it tells us that all religions lead to the same place, trying to get the same place. That is not true. Only Jesus. Only Him. There is no other way. Bow with me, please. Let's pray.